Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Steve Hackett, the former lead guitarist of Genesis, rocks Warner Theater in Washington, D.C. on April 13th. I spoke with Hackett about his 70s work in Genesis, from Peter Gabriel asking him to join the band to Phil Collins taking over as frontman, as well as Hackett's eventual decision to go solo. Steve Hackett, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, former lead guitarist of Genesis. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jason. Nice to talk to you.
Now, we're talking because you're going to be coming to the Warner Theater here in D.C. on April 13th, and you're calling it the Seconds Out Plus More Tour. What do we got? You're playing a full Genesis live album, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm doing that whole album. It's 90 minutes long. I'm doing solo stuff as well, a set of solo stuff before it. So it ends up being about 3 hours long. Of course, there's a break in the middle, 15, 20 minutes for people to powder their nose and get hammered at the bar and all the things that people do at live gigs. And then they're in the right frame of mind and the right condition to sing along with the Genesis stuff and stomp along with all that.
All right. So before they get hammered at the bar and before they powder their nose, they hear all of your great solo stuff, including your latest album, Surrender of Silence. Are you going to do anything from that?
Yeah, we do a couple of things from Surrender of Silence and things from Spectral Mornings and one or two others. So it's about 30 or 40 minutes of that. Then we put on the Genesis hat and we do the whole of Seconds Out, which includes Supper's Ready and Cinema Show and Firth the Fifth. Lots of great tunes from the 70s, basically.
Great. Well, I would love to get into all of that, but just so our listeners know, remind them. I want to know. Take me back to the beginning. I know you're born in London in 1950. How did you get in? How did you get into music as a kid? Did I read you were into classical and opera and that kind of stuff?
Well, the truth was my dad played a lot of instruments, and from the age of 2, I was desperately trying to play the harmonica. So by the time I was about 3 or 4, I was able to play tunes on the thing, and my dad could play a lot more instruments than I did, but harmonica was the thing to start off with. And so early influence, cowboy tunes, Davy Crockett, all of that. And then there was a bit of opera. There was a bit of Mario Lanza, Glenn Miller, Elvis, a lot of stuff. And then the Shadows came along, and that's where I first heard electric guitar. And then I guess the rest is history. I mean, I took up electric guitar, about the age of 14, and so that gradually took over from harmonica for me. But I am still a big harmonica fan, as it happens. But harmonica players in progressive rock are not well known, if you know what I mean. There's not a lot of prog harmonica going on, but I'll change that one day.
Maybe you will. Well, you already changed it on the guitar front. I mean, I know like your two-handed tapping and that kind of stuff. I know Eddie Van Halen, Brian May, like several people have cited you as influences. At what age did you pick up? I mean, you were talking about how you picked up electric guitar, when you were younger, but when did you start developing the two tap thing?
Well, that was 1971, in my first year with Genesis. I was trying to work out something to play on a track called Musical Box, which came out on Nursery Crime. So I was using tapping on that to start off with. And then there was a track called The Return of the Giant Hogweed on that same album, and that had a tapping intro to it. So you got that. And very often with Genesis, what we would do would be, Tony would have his electric piano put through a fuzz box, and he would start sounding a bit like a guitar as well. So we would do these harmony tapping things together. And it was a rather beautiful sound, and so I'm very grateful to J.S. Bach, who showed me the technique one day. He was born in 1685, but I was trying to play a line from Toccata and Fugue one day, and I thought the easiest thing to do is to play it on one string. So, of course, there are guitar teams out there, 20 or more guitarists all playing Toccata and Fugue, doing what that guy could do in one go on a keyboard. But it ends up sounding remarkably like organ in the end. So you got guitarists trying to sound like organists and keyboard players trying to sound like guitarists. What can I tell you?
Funny how that works. Well, you mentioned, the Music Box, which was off of that first album, Nursery Crime, 1971. Well, your first album with Genesis. But remind our listeners real quick how that you joining the band even came about. Wasn't it? Didn't you place an ad in Melody Maker magazine in like 1970 and Peter Gabriel saw it? Do you remember what your ad what
Yeah,
did your ad say?
I do. Yeah. Well, I'd advertised for 5 years, and then eventually I was getting tired of advertising myself as blues guitarist seeks work. And so over the years, it morphed into something like guitarist writer seeks involvement with receptive musicians, determined to strive beyond existing stagnant musical forms. And
Do you have
so
that on
I
memory,
was,
or did you read that?
no, I do know it from memory. And
Wow.
the funny thing was that Peter Gabriel realized I was either completely crazy or another idealist, he was trying to sound a little bit like Winston Churchill does rock. Do you know what I mean? We will strive to fight, we'll fight them on the beaches,
Right.
on the frets, on the stages, and all the rest. So yeah, he was as crazy as I was, and so we worked well together for a number of years.
That is wild. All right. So then he responds, and he was the perfect combo of, I guess you were both crazy and idealistic, as you
Yeah.
said. Just to remind everybody, though, it was Peter Gabriel was the lead vocals at the time. Phil Collins, who would later become solo fame, he was on the drums. Tony Banks on the keys,
Yes.
Mike Rutherford on bass, and you were in the lead guitar from, I guess, 71 to 77. You did 6 studio albums with them. You already mentioned Nursery Crime, but tell me about the second one, Foxtrot, in 72. That one was, is Supper's Ready? Is that still the band's longest recorded song?
Yeah, it's the band's longest recorded song. And I do an even longer version because I do a long guitar solo at the end of it. So I think the original is something in excess of 22 minutes, and mine sometimes goes up to 25 minutes.
Oh, God.
But that's what happens when you're having fun with guitars. I love doing this stuff live. It's great. Supper's Ready, in a way, was an idea that I had. I wanted to do a long form thing with all the bells and whistles, so that it would be a kind of either a musical continuum or a kind of musical odyssey for people to get lost in and come back to the same place at the end, and with a recapitulation of a theme or two. And so I guess it really borrows from classical music in that, long form program music is music that tells a story. And that's really what Genesis did with so many of our tunes back then.
Wow, 22 to 25 minutes. It takes, I guess, it takes a while for supper to be ready. It takes a while to prepare in the kitchen.
Cool for a single.
Yeah, right. Well, I know you mentioned Firth the Fifth. That was on the next album. That was Selling England by the Pound in 73. I think that charted like number 3 in the UK, the album. And it had other hits like I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe, etc. But tell me about your famous guitar solo in Firth the Fifth. Do you remember how you came up with that?
Yeah, well, actually, the song's really written by Tony Banks. And the melody that he originally played us on piano, Pete played it on flute as well. So you had piano and flute playing the melody. But I said, well, how about if I do it on guitar? And I made it sound a little more sort of Eastern. There was something Indian about it, or Eastern about the scale when you started to bend notes on it. And it's got a hint of Eric Satie about it, French impressionist composer, turn of the century sort of stuff. So I thought, well, if we do it like this, and if we have Mellotron behind it and do it big, I think it'll serve the melody much more than just doing it in this acoustic sort of way. So I've played it with all sorts of instruments over the years. Sometimes it's been a violinist taking the melody, sometimes a trumpet, sometimes flute and electric guitar. And I've done it with orchestras. I've done it in all sorts of ways, but it happens to be a really great piece of music. I think that the verse is lovely as well. So it's also got to work out for keyboard players who stumble over trying to play that intro. But Roger King does a great version of that every night. So he does it. Tony didn't want to play that live. Back in the day, he didn't have a grand piano to play it on. He tried to play it on an RMI, and it didn't really work. So, but we're able to do that now. We're able to make the sound of grand pianos, even on electric gear, of course, because it's many years hence from then. And it's a firm favorite. It happens to be a beautiful melody, a wonderful verse. Keyboard work up, and then this really long guitar solo that's about 3 minutes 30. So it's my longest guitar solo from the days of Genesis.
It's probably your most famous from those Genesis days. And you wait, real quick before I move to the other albums, you mentioned the Mellotron. If there's any casual music fans on here that might not know the instrumentation, explain what the Mellotron is.
Well, the Mellotron was originally invented to contain information. It was a way of storing info. So you've got a number of tapes that respond. But very quickly it got turned into a musical instrument. So that, along with the Chamberlin, the Beatles, of course, used it most famously on the introduction of Strawberry Fields, which always sounded like a really old organ or something like that, when I first heard it. But I remember seeing King Crimson using a Mellotron live and Moody Blues, and it just sounded stunning live. And I just knew that I had to work with a band that had a Mellotron. So, of course, for my first 6 months with Genesis, we didn't have that. We just had the organ and piano. And I thought, we got to get one of these things. And then fate intervened, and we heard that King Crimson was selling one of their Mellotrons. They seemed to have 3 of them, because I think one of them had been destroyed by fire at one point. So they had Mellotrons coming out of their ears, and so we went down. I took Tony Banks down to meet Robert Fripp, and Tony just sort of fell in love with the Mellotron straight away. We bought it off them for a very fair price. This thing was painted black. I think they called it the Black Bitch because it was always breaking down. And so we inherited this thing, which was wonderful when it deigned to sing. But there were times when it used to stick as well, and it would take 4 men on each corner, like pallbearers, to carry it anywhere. So it's a wonderful machine. The double manual one, the Mark IIs, as they called it, the one that the Beatles used on a few things. It was a lot of fun. It's still a great instrument. It's still wonderful. But what we do these days is I've taken the guts out of it and digitized it, and sometimes we bypass that altogether, because I did some work for Mellotron. I did some guitar stuff for them, and so I got the Mellotron tapes of the strings before it goes through the Mellotron. So we've got the cleanest Mellotron strings in the business. I've made people very jealous with that, but hey,
well,
it's
cool.
Just one of the things we do.
Thanks for walking me through that. That's that. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of shine a spotlight on the actual instrument, since you helped pioneer it so much in the use of that. All right. Well, then, so then the next one wound up being Peter Gabriel's Last with the Groove, the Lamb That Lies Down on Broadway in '74. Why exactly did he leave? Was it just to go solo, and do you think you could hear that on the record at all, or was it like a good grand finale for him?
Well, I think that Pete never really believed in the idea of composition by committee. He wanted to write his own stuff. When you're in a band, it's very difficult. You do have to compromise, and you're doing bits of things. If everyone wants to write everything all the time, you get phase cancellation and you get no band. The truth is, some characters have to be more receptive and passive in order to allow other geniuses to do what they need to do. But I think that all bands are built on a fault line to a degree. All bands break up. That's just the way it is. Apart from the Stones, and I don't think anyone's allowed to leave, or Keith will probably kill them. So he manages to keep that together. And that's great, but I think that's the only one where most of them are still alive, and most of them are still in the same band. But we did some great things as Genesis. That was a lot of fun. But Pete was always headed towards a solo career, and he left at the end of that album. I think you can hear the competition. You can hear the sort of the clash of horns in a way, this thing happening between Pete and Tony, very busy keyboard passages and very busy lyrical passages. So that gives it the thrust that the album has. It gives it its sense of claustrophobia, the very crowded New York streets, very crowded arrangements. And I don't know, it's almost more like a wrestling match than an album, I think, at times. But there are those who love it and think it's the greatest thing ever. Who would I wouldn't dissuade them from that. I was closer in spirit to Selling England by the Pound, but there are some great moments on the Lamb.
Yeah, well,
most of which are mine, of course.
Well, as you would say. But yeah, I mean, sometimes that contention can create great music too. But
sorry, I'm not taking life seriously here.
No, nor should. And what does it take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously, or something? But it's funny how it works. So then Peter Gabriel is gone, and that allows Phil Collins to kind of bump up and singing lead vocals on A Trick of the Tail in 1976. Yes. Which is the opportunity he needed to flourish and become a household name. Did you know how much did that change the sound of Genesis on that album? And even broader, like was he destined to be a breakout superstar on his own? Like, could you tell at that point?
Well, the truth is, when I first joined Genesis, one of the first things I wrote was with Phil, and it was for Absent Friends, and he was the one who sang it. But his voice was sufficiently similar to Peter that no one realized that Phil was doing it. And then he was singing More for Me on Selling England by the Pound, and starting to step out. And I asked him on the first solo album I did to sing a track called Star of Sirius. Mm-hmm. He had a great voice, no doubt about it. But I don't think anyone realized at that time what a global superstar he was to become. First of all, he was a very busy drummer with Genesis. And prior to that, he'd been a child actor and singer on the stage. Lionel Bart's Oliver, the musical on the West End stage. So because he had a theatrical background, his mother ran a stage school, and so I think he was, sent down the mines at a very early age. He was already working at the age of 3. You see these sort of, you remember when people used to knit with knitting patterns? It would be himself and his sister on the front with these Fairlisle sweaters or whatever they were called. So he'd already been a veteran by the time he joined Genesis. He'd been in service for a very long time. Very sweet guy, very talented, very driven, and had the ability to be able to write, those sort of everyman type songs.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just racking my brain in terms of drummers that went on to be big solo, of their own. I can't really think of more famous than Phil. Maybe Dave Grohl, I guess, went from Nirvana but yeah, like the drummer, it's a really great success story. And then the next one, of course, I guess let's just to round out all of your Genesis work. Wind and Withering was in 76. That would wind up being your last with Genesis. I think it had its first single, Your Own Special Way, was the first that charted in the US, I think. But yeah, just memories of your last record with them and why you ultimately decided that was going to be your last one so you could go do your solo stuff.
Well, the truth is, I did a solo album when I was still part of the band, and Mike and Phil were on it. The album started to take off in the interim, after Pete left, and no one really knew what the band's future was going to be. But I think it's difficult, when you have solo success, within a band, some people will feel that perhaps you aren't giving everything to the band that you should be. But the truth is, it's very difficult. If you're not really a founder member of a band, it can be very difficult, because you're always saying, I've got a song here, would you like to do it? And you're very happy if they do. Whereas, founder members, it's like, and my will be done. And so it was kind of difficult. So from then on, I became very prolific as a songwriter. But I knew that I was being told, well, either you can't do any more solo albums, or you've got to leave, or if you got to leave the band. And I thought, well, I'm being told that I'm an employee at this point. Having considered myself to be a full partner, I didn't want to be told what to do. My allegiance is to music itself. It's so important, I think, that bands have an outlet so that people can go off and do separate albums, because otherwise you're just a slave to some corporation. And I don't work like that. So I am a free man, as the prisoner says, Patrick McGowan. I'm not a number. I am a free man. I'm a free agent. Now, I've got no problem with the Genesis music. Absolutely loved the music and loved the work that we all did together. Sweated blood to write it with everybody and then tour it. So I did really give it everything I was allowed to do. And I'm very happy to play that stuff again live. But I'm very happy that I can do that stuff politics free. Internal politics of bands just slows it down, and you end up that there is no band at all in the end. Phase cancellation takes the place of communication. I'm sad to say so many bands go this way, and then sometimes you can get reformations, but so far that it hasn't really been the case since 1982. Last time I stepped on the stage with them all. So that's never really going to happen. And Genesis are saying that these are last concerts and that's it. And then they hang up their spurs. Well, I'm just getting going with this stuff because I want, I want these songs to be played live. I want them to be heard, and I wanted to do them to a certain standard and style. And I believe the band that I have does that more than justice.
Oh yeah. Oh, no doubt about it. And I like how you've like for this show at the Warner Theater, for instance, I like how you've divided it into, your solo stuff for the first half and then the Genesis stuff for the second half. It kind of reminds people that you have sort of had a duality of your career there, that, you make your own great stuff. What are you on? Like 27 solo albums or something? Like, what are you on now?
Something like that. Yeah. I mean, there've been many more, if you count all the live ones. And I mean, I've lost count of the amount of albums that I've shown up on of other people's. But it must be hundreds by now.
The body of work is just amazing. Well, I mean, I know that's impossible to dig through 27 albums, but if there's a listener that might be coming to the show just to hear the Genesis stuff, let's say they remembered the Genesis stuff, but don't know your solo stuff as well, hard to believe. If there's any of them listening, which album or two or three are you most proud of out of those 27 that they should go back and, if you want to distill what Steve Hackett's solo stuff is all about, what album would you suggest they go pick up?
Well, I think, there's Spectral Mornings. There's something about that. Those songs worked very well live, and I feature some of that still in the live set. There's also Surrender of Silence, the most recent album, which I'm very fond of, particularly the orchestral work that's on it. So you get orchestral metal. It's part of what I do, that thing about seeing a band live and thinking, ooh, I think I'm watching an orchestra. I'm listening to an orchestra, but it's coming at me like sheet metal, Right. That's fine.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
Devil's Cathedral. Yeah,
Devil's Cathedral's another one?
Yeah. Devil's Cathedral is on Surrender of Silence, which is a firm live favorite.
Awesome. And then you've just done so much. There was the supergroup stuff with Steve Howe, the guitarist from Yes, GTR. There's all your solo stuff. There's all the Genesis stuff. And then I guess sort of as a career accolade, you get inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Genesis in 2010. You said you were the last on stage with them in 82. Are you not counting?
Yes.
Do you mean performing, or did you not show up for the Rock Hall, or how did that work?
Oh no, I did show up for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So yes, we were on stage, but not performing. That was
Gotcha.
to receive the awards.
Was it rewarding that you would get inducted? Because a lot of times band members, they come, they go, they have different lineups over the years. By that point, you'd been out of the band for decades. But was it affirmation to you? Like, yes, my early pioneering stuff throughout the 70s formed Genesis. It set them on the path to being this rock hall. Like, did that reaffirm it for you that you were the seminal Genesis?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great that the early work was celebrated in that way. I think it's a great institution, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's no doubt about it. I wish we had something like that in England, but sadly, England has yet to discover rock and roll.
Well, they invented a lot of it. But
well, I know, but we don't have any official kind of celebration of it quite in that way where you guys do, because you celebrate writers who are no longer with us even, and that's great. It's not about being a new face on the block, but I think all of those acts that get celebrated, it's about paying dues. So I had a wonderful time there, meeting people, and many people were younger, many people were older. It was great fun.
It's been great. Thanks for making so much time. And in final seconds, I do want to ask one final thing, and it can be a one-word answer if you want. Of all the Genesis stuff they did after you left, Follow You, Follow Me, That's All, Invisible Touch, Throwing It Away, In Too Deep, Land of Confusion, Tonight, I Can't Dance, etc., etc., etc. Do you have a favorite song that Genesis did in your absence?
Let me see. I quite liked Abacap. I thought that was good. I liked it. I would have done a guitar solo on it, of course, or a harmonica solo.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, everyone, Steve Hackett, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, former lead guitarist of Genesis, coming to Warner Theater on April 13th. So get your tickets now. Thank you so much. You were great.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you at the Warner.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the D.C. area is great, and Podcast D.C. gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast D.C. is the new local app with hundreds of D.C. area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast D.C.